I'm so honored to be here, and I'm thrilled to just be surrounded by extraordinary Jewish women for the next 2 days. Huge thanks to Jewish Women's Foundation of New York for making it happen, especially in this time when coming together is both challenging and so incredibly needed. So we're going to spend the next 30 minutes together talking about human rights. And human rights with Jewish women at the helm. We could probably, especially in this moment in time, use 30 years, not 30 minutes, but we're gonna do our best. So let's dig in. Each of you is just doing absolutely extraordinary work. You're at the helm of such important work to impact change. And so I'd love you to take about a minute. I wish we had more time, but about a minute to talk a little bit about your work and how you are affecting human rights in your sphere. So Evie, let's start with you.
Okay, nice to see everybody. And thank you to the Jewish Women's Foundation for having this event. I work I'm the founder and executive director of Witness to Mass Incarceration. My focus is on women and LGBTQ people who are incarcerated. Now, the field of mass incarceration is filled with well-meaning activists and people wanting to end mass incarceration. However, now is not the time to dismantle the system. Prisons and jails and detention centers are a public health crisis, and all efforts at this moment should be towards directing towards the raging, out of control COVID-19 virus that's in all of these correctional facilities. In New York's Elmira, 25% of the people have tested positive. And so the question I have for you is, if there were 25% of the people in your building, your apartment building, who were COVID positive, what would be your singular focus? And I believe your singular focus would be to make sure you were protected and that people were safe. So at this point in time, the most important way in which you can help people is by reducing the prison population and by understanding that as you reduce it, the people who come out have nothing. So you need to support every initiative that's meant to help the people coming out.
So much to unpack there, Evie. Thank you. We're going to come back to you because I have lots of questions for you. But Jill, can you talk a little bit about your work?
Hi, first of all, thank you so much to everyone at the Jewish Women's Foundation. I've certainly benefited so much from all of you here, so I'm really happy to be here this morning. So I am the executive director of TRUA, which is an organization of more than 2,000 rabbis and cantors across the United States and Canada that works on human rights issues, both here at home in the United States and Canada, and also in Israel and the occupied territories. And we mobilize, like I said, more than 2,000 rabbis together with all of our communities and bring that moral voice of our community of rabbis, of cantors, of Jewish tradition into human rights. So some of the issues that we work on in the United States, we do a lot of work on mass incarceration. We work on slavery and trafficking, particularly in agriculture, and we work on protecting immigrants and refugees. In Israel, we primarily work on the human rights of both Israelis and Palestinians, as well as others in the area, like asylum seekers. So we work for a two-state solution and an end to occupation. Right now, though, we are doing a lot of work around the election, which is just about a week away, or actually happening right now, which means that a lot of our work right now is doing training for rabbis about the lead up to the election and what happens afterwards, which means that we're doing just a dizzying number of trainings about how to protect the vote, how rabbis can serve as peacekeepers, how rabbis and cantors can serve as election defenders, how to de-escalate, what to do if there's white nationalist violence, either during the election or after the election, how we can heal in our communities, how we can do what's called movement chaplaincy, which means basically being a chaplain on the street, just like you would be a chaplain in the hospital or in a prison or anywhere else. So that is much of our work right now in this moment, and ending whenever it ends, whether that is next Tuesday or in January or some other time, to mobilize that power of rabbis in the Jewish community to make sure that every single vote counts, and also that our elections are safe for everybody.
I mean, I wish that we were going to sort of see it end next Tuesday, but I suspect your work will need to carry on for so much longer, because there's just so much work to do, and there's so much pain, and there's so much struggle. So thank you. Susan, tell us a little bit about you and your work.
Okay, I will. And first of all, I would also like to start with thanking everybody for this opportunity to be here. Thank you to Jamie and Rachel and everyone at JWFNY, and thank you, Lauren. So my name is Susan Weiss, and I run the Center for Women's Justice in Israel. The Center for Women's Justice I call a not-for-profit legal organization. And what we do is we address the problem of how women are treated in Israel whenever religion and state clash, and the ensuing violations to the ensuing human rights violations. In other words, our argument is that whenever church and state clash, that they're often clashing over the bodies of women and causing human rights violations. So what we deal, the type of human rights violations that we deal with are the right to marry, the right to equality, the right to divorce, the right to religious freedom, the right to privacy, the right to freedom of conscience. And I'll explain how we do that. In Israel, we have a bifurcated system, almost schizophrenic. The woman can be a fighter pilot, but she can't get divorced. So what we see in Israel is we see a partial theocracy. And in this partial theocracy affects every single woman in Israel. Every single woman. It doesn't matter if she's religious. It doesn't matter if she believes in God. It doesn't matter if she's conservative, reform, or is a member of a community. The state is coercive, and the state coerces women to get married and divorced in an orthodox manner. And because of this, there are many human rights violations. For example, as a very basis, you can't marry whoever you want in Israel. There's no intermarriage in Israel. So love is not love in Israel. You can't marry whoever you want. So there's a very basic infringement on the right to marry. You can't get divorced. In other words, if you're a woman, you have to wait for your husband's agreement to divorce you. So there you have an immediate violation of CEDAW, the Convention for the Discrimination Against Women. They can't divorce. Because of this system, this partial theocracy, if a woman is suspected to be an adulteress, she's put on a blacklist. And her sexuality, what she's doing, who she's sleeping with, if she's sleeping with someone, is a matter of judicial inquiry. So this is an infringement on privacy and infringements on religious freedom. If this woman has had a child, the child will also be blacklisted and considered a mamzer. That's another infringement on the child, and not only for infringement on privacy, but the child cannot marry another kosher Jew. An infringement on the right to marry. But in addition, it's an infringement on the Convention on the Rights of the Child. The child is not the mamzer child, the child who's blacklisted and stigmatized, does not have the right to know who his biological father is. So, and as a result of this system, women who are not Jewish enough will be subjected to cross-examination by the rabbinic courts, also an infringement on their privacy and their freedom of conscience. If you're a convert, and the courts can ask if you're about your religious behaviors. This is another infringement. And we also deal with the issue of access to religious services. So we represent women who want to pray with Torah scrolls at the wall and are being denied Torah scrolls by the rabbi. So everything we do in the Center for Women's Justice involves human rights that are being violated by the state, and particularly against women when religion and church clash over their bodies.
Thanks so much. So I'm going to actually switch, like Rachel, I'm going to switch my hat from moderator to panelist right now and just tell you a little bit about my work. I'm the National Director of World Without Exploitation. World Without Exploitation is a national coalition designed to combat human trafficking and sexual exploitation here in the US. We are a coalition. We were created sort of looking at the field of human trafficking and recognizing that there were so many amazing organizations doing incredible work from around the country, but that these organizations kind of had two things in common. They were under-resourced and overworked. And so if we really wanted to harness partnerships and create serious systemic change, we needed to join together, leverage partnerships, and ultimately really create movement-based work. And so that's what we've been doing for the last 4 years. All of our work is really viewed through a human rights lens. We are working to create a world where nobody is bought, sold, or exploited. And that's the work we're doing every day. We're changing laws, we're changing perspectives, and we're changing, hopefully, lives, sometimes one at a time, and sometimes in bigger proportions. And I will tell you, friends, that at this moment in time, in this global pandemic, things are really, really complicated. I know, Evie, you and I have talked about this many times, that in this moment in time, the vulnerable are just more vulnerable. And you talked just briefly about this in your intro, but can you talk about how COVID-19 has impacted your work and has really sort of changed the lens that you, in the work that you're doing every day?
Oh, well, I think it's, if I considered myself radical before, I think it radicalized me, if that's possible, even more.
I love that.
but in part, I want to answer it in two parts. One in terms of the Jewish community, and one in terms of the incarcerated community. So I have strong feelings about the community's reaction, and here's where I mean. There are Jewish women fighting this battle to end mass incarceration from every part of the community on every issue. And as a community, we're becoming more and more aware of the importance of this issue. However, and I want to say this and go back to incarceration, there's one lesson the Jewish community needs to learn, particularly during this time. We need your help. However, we need to be the experts and you need to help us. And what's become critically clear is that like the Holocaust, unless you survived concentration camps, you cannot understand what it means if you haven't been in one. Mm-hmm. And so what I'm saying is that particularly during the time of COVID, we are vulnerable. We are going to die. It won't matter whether we get employment next year or housing next year. We are going to die in prison if you don't concentrate your focus and let us lead to help you. There's a study that just came out from the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, and it emphatically stated that it's an emergency situation, that there are 2.3 million people that are exposed and can die. Now, I'm sitting with this since March saying, and I'm in rooms with well-meaning people doing good work, but it doesn't mean anything if we're not going to be alive at the end of it. You must be nimble. You must change your priorities. You must understand that after next week, when everybody stops phone banking, you need to help us get people out of prison. And you need to financially support some of the people that are coming out, because they're coming out with nothing. And there's no job for them to come to, because COVID cost the United States 30 million jobs, and only a percentage of those have come back. Where are we supposed to go? So all these, when I sit in meetings and people talk about, let's figure out our legislative goals for next year. No, let's help the homeless be in hotels if they need to be. Let's help the formerly incarcerated population be reduced now. or you will watch the lower end of the spectrum of poverty. You will watch all the people at the low end of the spectrum be not be with us any longer.
Yeah, I mean, it's what you said about like we need to be heard, we need to be listened to. We're in my own work, we're really sort of laser focused with making sure that those with lived experience are centering the conversation and are really being listened to as the experts in this in the arena. And I love what you said in terms of being in those rooms and making sure that those voices are really driving the conversation. So huge thanks to you. Susan, let's kind of look across the world right now, and no doubt, you know, COVID has wreaked havoc everywhere. Israel, you know, has certainly been significantly impacted, and your work and the populations you serve have been impacted. Can you help us understand, you know, how that's happening and what you're doing about it?
Well, I think I can think of 3 ways in which COVID has impacted both our organization and what's happening in Israel. So the first way is very real and immediate, and in that, you know, all the women are in the house, and any problems that there may be in a family relationship, you know, and a woman who wants to get divorced are accelerated during this period. And I'm sure that's the situation that occurs all over the world. So if someone is in an abusive relationship, that abuse can be compounded during COVID, and that makes our immediate work even more immediate. But actually, there's a positive spin on the COVID, and that's this Zoom, I think, and the fact that now we can reach all over the world, and I can actually try and get the diaspora to understand what's going on in Israel, because what's happening here is a real challenge to democracy. The problem of women and what happens when church and state clash over their bodies is a problem of democracy. It's a problem of religious freedom. It's a problem of civil liberties. It's a problem of how we want to see Israel look. And so this is an opportunity for me to get our word out, I think, to more and more people. And then a third way, I think what COVID has really taught us, and this is a very painful lesson, is that to some extent, there's a state within a state in Israel. And the state within a state being the ultra-Orthodox community that doesn't necessarily feel that that some of these values of democracy and freedom and civil liberties and women's rights are necessarily their highest value. And I think more and more people are understanding that this multicultural accommodation that we've lived with for many years may have come at the expense of some of these basic values. So I think that is a very deep understanding that we are reaching during COVID. And I don't know if that will help our cause, but I'm hoping that it will.
Yeah, I hope so too. Jill, talk to us about your work and kind of what you're seeing and how COVID, I mean, I imagine it has impacted your work in really profound ways. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, like Evie and Susan said, COVID has affected everything that we all know. That should not be a surprise. But when I think about the last few years, we kept thinking that the human rights situation in the United States couldn't get any worse. So, for example, just I guess last fall, I think last October, we took about 25 rabbis and Jewish leaders down to the border in El Paso to see the situation on the ground there. And many of us really hadn't seen anything that bad in the United States in our lifetime in terms of a migrant camp on the border. We came back certainly very energized to speak about that experience and to be active in protecting the rights of refugees and asylum seekers, and our rabbis across the country were doing work in their own communities around that. And now here we are about a year later, and the situation is so much worse because the people who are living in tents on the US border are still living in tents. And now there's also the fear of the virus, or the work that we've been doing around incarceration for years now. Now, of course, we know that prisons, as Evie said, are one of the really largest sites of outbreaks of COVID, and people who are living there have really zero protections. We've done work for about the last 10 years with farm workers, particularly in Florida, in Southwest Florida, and have been working in partnership with a group called the Coalition of Immokalee Workers on a program that they initiated, a fair food program that protects workers from trafficking, from wage theft, from sexual assault, from rape, from sexual harassment, other kinds of violence, et cetera, et cetera. It's an extraordinary program. And now, which has done, I mean, it's really transformed the situation of tens of thousands of farm workers. And now the farm workers across the country who are considered essential workers are working in situations where it's very easy for the virus to be transmitted. So a lot of our work over the last 6-8 months has been about the impact of COVID on the areas where we already worked. So for example, the Coalition of Immokalee Workers asked us to be part of a campaign to get the governor of Florida to send medical units, including testing and treatment, to Southwest Florida. And we had people making phone calls, as well as, of course, farm workers and others were making phone calls to get the governor to send a mobile medical unit that was able to do testing, and that happened. Though also Doctors Without Borders is now there as well. So and also advocating, for example, for non-citizen workers in the United States to be covered in through COVID relief programs. So in all of the work that we've been doing, now COVID is another layer on what was already really a dangerous human rights situation. And a lot of our advocacy over the last number of months has been about addressing that situation layered on top of the human rights crisis that already existed.
It's so complicated, isn't it? Because there's so many issues at play, and you hit it when you said, just when we thought things couldn't get worse, then now here we are a year later, and things are just so much worse. So there's a lot of noise going on, right? There's so many catastrophes day in and day out, and it almost feels like, where do we turn? Where do we look? And so I look to each of you, and would love your insights on where should we put our focus, especially in this moment. And so we can talk kind of in the immediate, where do we put our focus? And over the next bunch of months, where do we put our focus? We're no doubt gonna talk about the next week, but Susan, let's talk first with you about where should we focus, and then we can kind of move into the US, the election, and what's gonna ultimately happen here. So Susan, let's start with you.
Okay, I'd love to answer that question. Of course, yeah. I'm very biased when I answer that question.
That's okay, we'll take your bias and all.
I really would like us to focus on Jewish women, and right now, Israel is enabling violations of human rights of women, and it's hard for us to understand that when we know that women in Israel can be fighter pilots, but we don't really see all these violations that are occurring, and they're real, and it really is challenging what Israel is going to look like. Is it going to be a democracy? Is it going to be a theocracy? Is it going to ensure civil liberties? So I would really like the help of the diaspora to make sure that Israel is a place where everyone wants to come and everyone is proud of, and women can stand free, and I can know that my grandchildren are here. So I personally would love us to focus on Jewish women And I think that we have to start really understanding what's happening for Jewish women in Israel and how, but not only, actually, it's not only for Jewish women, really. I think that women's rights are human rights, and what has to be, we want an Israel that is a democratic Israel for everyone, for men, for women, for our children, our grandchildren. And I would like us to put our emphasis there. I mean, I do think it's important, obviously, to do all this other work that everyone is doing, but I think we have to look home and we have to look, what's affecting us. So that's where I would like you to go.
Totally makes sense. Makes sense. Jill?
I don't know that I'm actually going to answer your question, but I'll say that everything is a crisis right now. And we can just get stuck trying to figure out the most important place to put our time and our energy and our money. And there's no answer to that because everything is important. And so what I would say is for everyone to pick something. It almost doesn't matter what that something is and to commit to it. Because some of what happens is that when there's some new sexy issue that comes up, then sometimes people forget about the issues that are maybe not so much in the news. I mean, immigration is a perfect example of this, that we were so, there was a moment that the horrible pictures of separated families and children in cages were all over the news, and then our attention was diverted elsewhere. And not that the elsewhere wasn't also important, but the families were still separated. And so for all of us just to make the commitment that whatever it is that we're committed to, that we're in it for the long run, not just when the news is focused on that.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I agree with you. I think people have to figure out sort of what resonates with them, but also I think it's important to kind of recognize how interconnected so many of these issues actually are, right? So, we're talking about issues, human rights issues, and at the center of so many are sort of the intersection of racial, gender, and income inequality. And so recognizing that, digging deep into that, and finding something, just as you said, Jill, finding something that speaks to you, that you connect with, and that you can ultimately focus on and make change, because every one of us have the power to make powerful change. Evie, I know you're going to put this into focus for us. Where should we be looking?
So I'm going to probably disagree a little bit in terms of focus. I think COVID has revealed some of our weaknesses as a movement structurally. And to get back to the but and conversation of the previous group, I think we need to use this opportunity to understand not only the issues, but how to approach each issue in the most effective way. And what I mean by that is I primarily work in the Jewish space with Jewish organizations. I have a lot of people who want to either volunteer or help in understanding this. I'm part of coalitions I'm the only Jewish formerly incarcerated person in the room. And this becomes a problem for me and I'm saying this for whether it's immigration or whether it's mass incarceration. You have to identify who are the experts and you have to let them lead. I am a Jewish formerly incarcerated woman, and I am an expert in mass incarceration. And we need to look at formerly incarcerated people. And if you're dealing with the issue of mass incarceration or translated to any issue, you need to let us lead. For real change to happen, we need to be elevated. And in doing this, you pay respect to what we've been through, and you provide us with additional courage for the fight. Now, let me say this clearly. We need your strength, not your leadership. We need your time, but not your leadership. We need you because without you, we can't do it, but we need you to know that we must lead the fight. And I say this because we are in crisis. And people have a lot of ways of doing things. And I think we have to simplify it and understand there are some people who experience this more. And I, on that note, want to thank the Jewish Women's Foundation of New York for supporting the work on ending mass incarceration and my voice.
Amazing. So we talked sort of big, broad strokes, but now I want to really sort of focus on what people can do. So there's a great quote from Elie Wiesel, and he said, "There may be times when we are powerless to prevent injustice, but there must never be a time when we fail to protest." And so specifically, I want us to be sort of quick here. What can people do right now? Because I suspect after listening to each of you has been so inspiring. What can people do to lift up your work and support you right now? Anybody can tackle it.
Okay, I think for my work, we need to support organizations that are led by formerly incarcerated people. We are the least funded, and we are on the ground and knowing what's going on. And that's so, and we need the volunteers and the support. But instead of supporting large nonprofits who serve us, support us, because we're actually doing the direct work on the ground.
Great. And anybody, Susan, Jill?
Well, there's so much to do. There's this site that I know of, if I can remember it, it's 100, I think it's like 101 ways of civil disobedience. There's so many, there's Gene Simmons or something. I should really Google it right now. I didn't prepare for this. But I think the people in the diaspora can obviously support our work with money. In Kemach and Torah, you know, without money, there's nothing, we can do nothing. But I would like them to understand what's going on. I would like them to learn. I would like them to get involved, to care, and to start really thinking differently. I would like critical thinking. I would like them to demand changes from our leaders. I would like them to, you know, I would like them to write letters of protest. I would like them to stand with placards. I would like them to focus, to just get a better education, and to you know, for one thing that I'd like everyone to do if they get married is to sign a prenup. To understand that there's a problem when a Jewish woman gets married, that she could be held in marital captivity, and there are prenups that they should be signing. So that's education, but that's also doing something. They should support alternative privatization of religious activities in Israel. For example, there are these alternative rabbinic courts that have been set up. You know, support them. Listen to our blogs, listen to our podcasts, think about what's going on, understand that that you can make a difference if you know what's going on.
Jill?
I'll say three things. First of all, yes, of course, all of our organizations need money. Every human rights organization needs money. So again, figure out what you are committed to and commit to it. Second, that we should all figure out what it is that we're doing on election day and afterwards to protect the vote. One very simple thing is just to tell all your friends that the election will not be over on November 3rd, and to prepare for it possibly to take a long time to count all the votes. You can also go to Trua. We have an election center. I'll put it in the chat box, but it's trua.org/election. Very easy to find with lots of resources and information. And then the third thing, you know, we are of course nonpartisan here, but whoever is president in January, no matter whether you're happy with the situation or very upset, human rights, nothing will be fixed, even if there's a change in administration. So to decide now what it is that we all want to work on, that's not going to be the same for all of us, but for each of us, what do we want to work on from now on, January, February, for years to come, to continue pushing for the protection of human rights.
Amazing. Oh,
I'm back. Sorry, that was quick. Thank you. That was great. Lauren, how about you answer that question before we transition? Love to hear from you on that.
Sure. Vote, 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 and vote. That's one. And then two, on December 10th, World Without Exploitation is hosting a webinar where we are doing exactly what Evie suggests, which is to listen to the leadership of survivors. And so you can find that webinar on our website. I would encourage all of you to, we have 10 extraordinary survivors who are going to talk about policy, about legislation, and about what needs to happen in order to combat human trafficking and sexual exploitation. So I would invite you to join us on that. And thank and support Jewish Women's Foundation of New York, because they are doing extraordinary work to bring Jewish women together and really connect the dots on all of these important issues so that we can make change. So huge thanks to you, Jamie, and your team.